I was doing some beyond general maintenance to it just because it hadn't seen any attention in probably 5 years, maybe. I really don't know. And I thought this was interesting. I wish this thing had an hour meter on it, because this thing has to have a ton of hours on it. I'm not sure how to gauge how many hours it has on it, but something that I thought was kind of crazy is, so here's the cotter key that went in there. Now this washer isn't one piece with the wheel, so this washer can rotate on its own. But so this cotter key sat in here like that, or more like that. And what I thought was interesting is just the amount of wear on this thing. I mean, you can see where the exact radius of the washer has worn probably 30% of it away. All right, so I got the other side off, and it's got some considerable damage there. You can see the amount of wear. Yeah, that's about what it's supposed to be, and then it wore it all down to that. And clearly it's had some pretty heavy debris going through there to eat it all up like that. I didn't find any gross or nasty grease in there, which is kind of concerning, because that would lead me to believe that for the majority of this thing's life, whoever was using this thing didn't grease any of this stuff, if the only grease that was in there is the grease that I've put in it. So that might explain the condition of it. And this bushing came out of the rim, which you can't see it, but it looks good on the inside. There, you can see it. It looks good. I was pretty pleased with it until I, put it on here, and that's our fitment. So yeah, it's definitely got a good bit of wear, but not worth trying to fix. So we'll just put it back, grease it, and keep it greased and put it back together. Okay, front axle is back in. I haven't greased any of the grease certs yet. Then I got this. This was a repair. It originally had one of those type deals on it, but that since wore out and fell off a long time ago. And so did this fix, and the nut on the back tightens up to this piece and binds the bolt up so that the bolt can't loosen. And that seems to work pretty good. Here's a tech tip. This is something, the end of the rod down there, just like up here, wore out. And I decided to try something, and it actually ended up working. Instead of just drilling a hole all the way through it with a bolt and putting a bolt through it like this, what I did is that's a single piece of wire that wraps around twice. So it comes across here once and then goes over and comes back around on this side. And so the reason for that is then once you have all that on there, you just tighten up the wire, and then I'll do it on the other side. And that keeps it from falling apart, basically. Okay, got the mower deck off. The front end's all greased up. It seems a lot tighter than it was before, so that's nice. I think tightening up the king bolt there, or whatever that thing's called, I think that, and then tightening up the bolt on the other side, that was a cheap fix. That also, those two things seem to make the steering quite a bit tighter. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's still got all kinds of slop in it, but it's nowhere near as bad as it was. So here's the mower deck. It's a 36-inch deck, which is pretty small by today's comparison. But the construction of this whole thing is pretty interesting. So this isn't really stamped sheet metal like it is today. I mean, it's quite a bit thicker. everything on this thing is quite a bit thicker. Just the weight, so the frame, if you notice the frame just looking at it here, is basically a giant piece of C-channel. So they way overbuilt these things. So it's pretty much that giant piece of C-channel, and it's probably, I don't know if it's quite 1/8 inch, but it's probably getting close to that if it's not. And then the front axle is just solid cast iron, so it's not just some stamped steel thing. So, and comparing it to the John Deere out in the shop that I put that electric fuel pump on a couple years ago, this thing actually weighs more than that John Deere, even though the John Deere is bigger. This thing, with the cast iron motor that isn't on there, is supposed to weigh like 550 pounds or something like that. So it's not light, and the construction of it, with how overbuilt it is the majority of it. Like, this mower deck is not going to rust out. I mean, it's just, that is realistically never going to happen. And the construction of, there are some shortcomings here. And probably the biggest shortcoming with the drivetrain is, well, we'll get to the motor later. The original motor had issues, and I don't understand why. I guess they wanted the vertical shaft engine to make it driving the mower deck easier, but then the belt arrangement underneath is kind of interesting as a result of that. But the biggest, the only thing that's actually been a problem since we've got it going is how the pulleys are mounted here was the strangest thing. So we welded both of them on, so I can't really show how they worked, but basically what the deal was is the shaft goes all the way through the mower deck, right? You have a top bearing, you have a lower bearing, blade mounts down on the bottom, pulley mounts up on the top. Except what they did, I don't know why they, I don't know, I don't get it. But what they ended up doing is this pulley did not have a keyway or anything. This pulley was threaded on the inner bore of it, and it threaded onto the spindle, obviously in the orientation where the belt would keep it tight and not loosen it. And then to keep it from backing off, it had a roll pin that went through the shaft to keep it from coming off. So that was an interesting deal. And what happened is I don't remember which one it was, but when we went to go take one of the blades off, we made a tool that grabbed the pulley here because we didn't obviously have that original tool. And we're taking the belt, we're taking the blade off, and we're like, oh man, that was quick, that was easy. Well, what had happened is the nut never loosened on the blade. And what had ended up happening is because this was threaded, this started unthreading, and it sheared off part of the roll pin and drug it through the threads of the pulley, completely and totally wiping out the threads. So that one deal is this thing doesn't mulch grass very well, just because it has a relatively low blade speed compared to the speed at which it drives. So in a attempt to try and fix that, is I got these blades that kind of have this serrated edge on them a little bit, just to see if that would help. And the reason I stacked them on there is I couldn't find actual blades that fit this deck. So these two blades are the original blades to this thing, at least to my knowledge. I can only assume they're original based on how most everything else has been with this. But that's kind of an issue there, that ginormous gap. So what I ended up doing is because that gap's a lot smaller, is I just stacked them. So, I mean, it definitely seemed to mulch the grass up better. It didn't seem to process it any better, but it definitely cut it up finer. This is all Pour 15 that I put on here when I first got this deck going again. And that's the only place that it's come off thus far, just because this is where, you know, it's coming back in and sucking clippings back in and rubbing them all up against the side there. But the rest of it seems to be holding up pretty good. All right, so I got the idler pulley off for the drive belt. And I thought this was interesting because I was looking at this. And I was like, man, this thing looks homemade. You know, it's just two pieces of flat stock welded together, and then the weld on this side is a little less than stellar. But it's not, and what's interesting is it actually has a brass insert built into it, which is pretty cool. Unfortunately, it was seized onto the bolt, and instead it had been, where are we at? It had been wearing on the bolt. See that there? But I got it freed up and out, and instead of having it spinning in this hole on the threads, we'll get this greased up and have it spinning where it's supposed to. And this is one of the pulleys we had to replace. So this one, the original one, wore out to the point that because the drive system on this is less than ideal, because you go from a pulley that sits horizontal to one that sits vertical. And so that twisting force on the pulley eventually wore the original one out to the point that the actual pulley was wearing on the I guess the inner shaft or whatever that is, the inner bearing race. Man, this is getting into a mess. Okay, so I got the idler arm off for this one is for the deck drive, and I put oil on the top here and just kept, you know, working the pulley back and forth, and eventually I had oil coming through the other side, so that pulley is all oiled up and good. The part of the clutch assembly, and when I took it off, sit up please. You can see there, that's actually a hole in the side of the cover, which I'm just gonna put a bit of grease back over that. So that hole was there, which kind of freaked me out, but it doesn't look like a whole bunch of stuff has gotten in there. It was pretty much covered over. So I used that hole to pack the bearing with grease. Took absolutely forever, and I've pretty much rubbed my finger raw doing it. But so I used that to pack the bearing full of grease, and it worked pretty good. So since that one already had a hole in it, I went ahead and just did the same thing that was on that side, and I took a real small drill bit and just gently put a little hole in the side of the cover, and did the same thing on this side and packed it all with grease. Taking forever. Okay, so it's slowly starting to come back together. This is just loosely bolted in here. I had to take this belt off in order to get the clutch spring back on because there's just not enough room and way too stiff. I have the transmission in gear right now, and so there's where the play stops going forward, and then there's the play back. So that's about the total amount of play. Which, more play than I'd really like to see in it, but if there's a little bit of play down by the differential with such low gearing, it takes quite a bit to pick it up. So I'm gonna not worry about it too much because I can't even get parts for this. I've looked off and on for, I don't know, probably 6 or 8 years trying to find a spare transmission or parts or anything, and it's a Peerless 1200, and that little side-to-side play there. It's a Peerless 1200, but there's no parts available for them, and I've never seen a used one come up. But yeah, so getting it all back together now. This is back together. That pulley there is obviously not original. This belt was the right size when we put it on, but then it stretched a whole bunch because I guess that's just what they do. And so this was the original belt retainer that sat originally way down here, and I drilled one of the holes different and swung it up and put this pulley on it to take up the slop, and that works out pretty good. It's been kind of I think that was like the engineering design challenge, is how many roll pins and cotter keys can they put in this thing. But in putting a roll pin through here, they effectively took out almost all the structure of this, you know, relatively beefy piece of metal, because all that's holding it is just that little bit of meat between, you know, the outer diameter of this shaft and the edge there, and then the roll pin, you know, makes the walls real thin. And I don't know if it shows up on video, but it's actually cracked there, and at some point that thing's just gonna break off altogether. So that'll be fun. I'm not too worried. That's for the brakes. I'm not too worried about it though, because the brakes on this thing are already absolutely horrific. They basically are kind of a, I don't know, you'd probably be better off just leaving it in gear and shutting the motor off if you were actually have to stop. We're gonna see if this oil filter works. There's the part number for it. It's not an exact one. Well, no, it should be the exact one. The font's on it a little bit different. This one's got the logo on it instead of just saying Honda. And I don't know what year it is because I just looked up the part number, but supposedly this is the same as, you know, Civics or a CRV or something like that. These are a little bit different. This is the one that was on it. It has much smaller ports on it. This one has much larger ports on it. So this one fits on there though. So we're just gonna go ahead and put this one on there. The dimensions and everything are the same. The thread pitch is the same. The inlet holes there are the only difference. And then really I don't see the difference that bigger ones are gonna make. It's just gonna be less restriction to oil. All right, I want to video this because this has an interesting thing that scared me the first time I changed the oil in this thing. And there it is. So usually it's a lot louder. I think it's because I had the this open here. It I don't know. I think that might have screwed with it. But yeah, so it makes this loud screaming noise whenever it runs low on oil. And that's to warn you to shut the thing off. But it'll do it for a second whenever you change the oil, which is fun. Well, this is great. Look, friend, the door is right there. You're looking at it. Go on, work your way outside. Ordinarily, what you'd do is if you opened up, well, I already have a door open. Ordinarily, if you just turn the lights off, they'd see the sunlight and follow they'd go towards the light. But the only reason he came in here was because of the light, so turning off the lights is gonna do nothing for both of us. So, let me further delay my project and try and figure out how to get this damn thing out of here. I'm thinking that door might be more beneficial. If I get to the point where I can grab you, then, I mean, natural selection. There he is. Good. Stay the hell out. Got the old gear oil out of the Transaxle, and it looks pretty good. It looks way better than I thought it would have. I can definitely see, I got the light on the camera on, so it's really reflecting off all the metal. That right there is about the worst that's in there. That's where most of it settled, and then you just see little specks here and there. But that seems to be about the worst of it. So, I mean, I'd prefer it not be there at all, but all in all, I don't think it's as bad as it could be. So, it's still dirty as all hell, but it's back together now. And we'll get it out tomorrow morning and see how it does, I guess. Okay, give it a little bit of gas, put the choke on, pull it over to the compression stroke.